My husband led me to believe he almost never drinks alcohol. 2 years into our marriage, I find out it's a lie. So this has been weighing on me for a while now, and I finally feel like I need to talk about it. Really talk about it. Because I'm at a point where I genuinely don't know what to do. And I think getting it all out might help me understand what I'm even feeling. My husband is 32. I'm 30. We've been married for 2 years, and I recently found out that the foundation of one of the most important agreements we made before getting married, one of the things I was clearest about, one of the things I stated as a firm boundary, was built on something that wasn't true. Let me give you some background, because I think it matters. My dad was an alcoholic for my entire childhood. That's the environment I grew up in. The unpredictability, the tension, the way alcohol just poisoned everything it touched in our home. When I was a teenager, I became an alcoholic myself. I don't say that lightly, I lived it. And then my first marriage, I married someone who was also an alcoholic, someone who hid his addiction from me after he promised to stop, and who was abusive. So by the time I came out the other side of all of that, I had a very clear picture of what I needed in my life going forward. I had been sober for 5 years by the time I started dating my now husband. 5 years of building something I was genuinely proud of, and I knew, I'd thought deeply and carefully about it, that I could not be in a relationship with someone who drank alcohol. Not because I was trying to control anyone, but because of everything that word represents in my life. Everything it has taken from me. So when I was dating him, I was transparent about all of this. I laid it out. I told him about my sobriety. I told him about my father. I told him about my first marriage. I told him that being with someone who drinks was not something I was able to do. And he told me, he assured me, that he almost never drinks. That he'd have a beer once in a blue moon. That he just didn't really drink anymore. That it wasn't his thing. He framed it as something he just naturally moved away from. He didn't call himself sober, and I want to be honest about that. He never used that word. But what he described sounded so close to it that I believed we were compatible on this. We were spiritually compatible. We aligned on health and values, so I took him at his word. I want to be clear that I do think that was a mistake on my part. I've reflected on this a great deal, because I accepted a vague assurance instead of asking harder, more specific questions. I should have pressed further, but I also believed him. I loved him. And once in a blue moon is not what followed. Literally, the week after we got married, 1 week, he drank a bit too much, and I said I wasn't comfortable with that. I told him clearly how it made me feel. Within the first year of our marriage, he was buying packs of beer and drinking them at home, or when we were out together, just the two of us. He started to where he wouldn't attend a dinner out or go to any kind of gathering without having a beer or two. He wasn't getting drunk, and I want to be fair about that. But that wasn't the agreement. The agreement, the understanding I had when I married this man, was that alcohol was barely part of his life at all. And now it was present every time we went anywhere. It was in our home. I told him many times how misled I felt. I tried to explain, as carefully and as honestly as I could, what this was doing to me. Not just practically, but emotionally. The echoes it was bringing up. The way it made me feel like I was back in a situation I'd worked so hard to leave behind. And eventually, after many of those conversations, he agreed that he wouldn't drink around me. That felt like some kind of step, even though it still hurt. But then he also said that sometimes he would just hide it from me. Like at family events, he'd go into the garage and have a drink so it wasn't directly in front of me. And I told him I wasn't okay with that either. Not because I wanted to monitor him, but because hiding it is exactly the pattern that defined my most painful experiences. My ex-husband hid his drinking. My father hid his drinking. The hiding is part of what the problem was. I was not going to be in a marriage where my husband felt he had to sneak around me to do something he knew I had clearly said I couldn't live with. And now we're here. Now he gets together with friends and he has a few beers every single time. In the beginning, those gatherings were maybe once a month. But lately it's been multiple times a week. Multiple times a week. And he tells me I'm controlling. He tells me I need to deal with it. I have sat with that. I have genuinely tried to ask myself whether there is something in my past that is making me unreasonable here. I've looked at it from every angle I can, and what I keep coming back to is this. I was honest before we got married. I was completely honest about who I was, what I had been through, and what I needed. I stated my boundaries clearly, and what he described about himself, how little alcohol was part of his life, that is not what this is. What he described and what is actually true are two different things. I wouldn't have entered a relationship with someone who felt they needed to have at least 2 beers at every single social function. I was always clear about that. And now, I'm in a marriage with someone who does exactly that, and the frequency is only increasing. I do believe in the vows I made. I take marriage seriously, deeply seriously. I don't believe in divorce, and that conviction is real and it's mine. But I also know myself well enough to know that I'm not going to be okay with this. Not in a year, not in 10 years. Everything alcohol has meant in my life, my father, my own struggle, my first marriage, it lives in me. I can't simply decide not to feel what I feel when I'm around it, when it keeps expanding into more and more of our life together. What I'm sitting with right now is a question I don't have an answer to. Do I accept this and carry that weight for the rest of my life? Because right now, that's what it feels like the choice is. Accept it and be miserable. Or face something I never wanted to face. And neither of those options feels like a life I recognize. I've been reflecting on whether I made the initial mistake by not asking more specific questions before we married. I think I did. I think once in a blue moon is not a specific enough assurance, and I accepted it when I should have said, "Tell me exactly what that means to you. What does almost never look like? How many times a year? What does a social event look like for you?" I didn't ask those things, and I carry some responsibility for that. But I also told him what I needed. I was not vague. I was not unclear. My history with alcohol is not a small thing I slipped into a conversation. It was central to who I was and what I was bringing into our relationship. And he knew that. And he told me something that turned out not to be true. He's not going to change. I do understand that. I've heard that sentiment and I relate to it. The idea that if someone isn't willing to change, then the question becomes what I'm going to do with that reality. But what to do with it when leaving isn't something I believe in. That's where I'm lost. I really do love him. That's what makes this so painful. This isn't a situation where everything else is wrong and the alcohol is just the final straw. I love this person. We are connected in other ways that matter to me. But I also know that what he described when we were dating, the person who barely drinks, who had just moved away from it, who had no particular relationship with alcohol, that person and the person I'm living with are not the same. And I married the first description. I gave my vows to what I understood him to be. I don't have a resolution to offer right now. I'm still very much in the middle of this, trying to understand what my options are and what kind of life I'm actually willing to live. I'm not someone who walks away easily from hard things. That's not who I am. But I also spent years in recovery, building a version of myself that knew her worth and knew what she could and couldn't carry. And I'm trying to hold on to both of those things at the same time. If anyone has been through something similar, a relationship where someone misrepresented something fundamental about themselves before marriage, especially something tied to addiction or recovery, I would really genuinely value hearing from you. Not because I'm looking for permission to do anything, but because I'm trying to understand how people navigate something like this. How do you hold your convictions about marriage alongside the reality that you may have married someone who wasn't fully honest about who they were?